Why was she always the one they looked past? The question lingered at the edge of her mind as she leaned over the clipboard, double-checking the numbers scratched in grease pencil on the fuel tank's panel. Around her, the base stirred with the slow rhythm of another dawn, boots crunching over gravel, the low hum of diesel generators, distant rotors starting up in the flight line. Soldiers hurried past in twos and threes, weapons slung across their shoulders, their faces already set with that guarded expression people wore when danger was expected but not yet present. No one paused to notice her. No one ever did. She wasn't infantry. She wasn't a pilot. She wasn't even part of the weapons team. She was just a fuel tech. The one who kept the tanks full, the choppers fueled, the engines from coughing to a stop mid-mission. Essential, yes, but invisible. She told herself that didn't bother her, that it was better, even safer. The world looked at the frontline fighters like they were carved from a different stone, men and women destined for headlines and medals. She was the one who stayed behind, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with the smell of JP-8 fuel, a wrench or nozzle in her grip instead of a rifle. But when she caught her reflection in the glass of the depot window, hair tied back tight, eyes ringed from too many late shifts, she sometimes wondered, was this really why she'd enlisted? To count gallons, to double-check delivery manifests, to breathe fumes instead of air. Her father wouldn't have thought so. She could still remember the weight of the rifle in her hands the first time he'd taught her to shoot. She hadn't been tall enough to see clearly over the tall grass, but he'd steadied her arms, whispered in her ear, "Breathe, hold it, don't fight the rifle, let it speak." And when the shot cracked, the tin can toppled in the distance, she'd been too shocked to cheer. He had only nodded, proud but quiet, as though he had known all along she could do it. Years passed, and shooting had become more than a skill. It was a secret rhythm, a place her mind went when everything else in life felt unsteady. Hunting in the woods after school. Long summer afternoons spent on hay bales with an old bolt-action. Precision had been her escape, her meditation, her rebellion against a world that rarely listened when she spoke. The Army hadn't cared about that when she enlisted. They'd cared about test scores, aptitude assessments, the quiet diligence she showed with technical work. Petroleum supply specialist, that was her designation. It sounded important. It sounded official. But it also sounded like a door had shut. And maybe that's why she clung to the range sessions on base, those late nights when everyone else had gone to the rec hall or their bunks. She'd stay behind, adjusting her stance, experimenting with breathing cycles, stretching distance. The had laughed the first time she asked to take a shot past 600 yards with the designated marksman's rifle. But when the steel target clanged, distant and faint, the laughter stopped. Word traveled. The fuel tech who could outshoot the marksman. She never confirmed it, never bragged. It wasn't who she was. But in the solitude of the range, she admitted the truth to herself. Part of her longed for something beyond hoses and gauges. Something closer to that childhood memory of her father's nod. Now standing in the cool dawn at the forward operating base, clipboard in hand, she tried to shake the thought away. Today was like any other. She had tanks to monitor, transfer valves to inspect, numbers to reconcile. She told herself she was comfortable in routine, that the comfort of order meant safety. But she could feel it. Something in the air. The past week had been restless. Rumors whispered in the mess tent about enemy scouts in the hills, intercepted chatter, unusual movements on night patrols, the kind of fragments that never made it into official briefings but traveled fast through rumor. She felt the shift even if no one had said it aloud. The laughter was shorter. The conversations. Every soldier on base had developed that look, the one that said, "Something coming." She tightened the seal on the tank valve and glanced toward the perimeter wall, where the guard tower stood in the haze of morning light. From here, the mountains looked quiet, beautiful even, ridges glowing amber under the rising sun. To anyone else, it might have seemed like peace, but she knew better. Danger didn't announce itself. It waited, patient, watching. "Morning Tech," a voice called. She turned to see Corporal, one of the young infantrymen, jogging past with his rifle bouncing against his chest. He gave her a half-smile, the kind men sometimes gave when they weren't sure whether to take someone seriously. She lifted her chin in return. No words. She wasn't in the mood to explain herself to someone who thought a rifle was only a combat weapon and not the language she'd spoken since she was 12. Inside the depot, she checked the gauges again. Everything was normal. Tanks topped off. No leaks. No anomalies. Routine. Always routine. She rubbed her palms against her uniform pants, trying to ease the restlessness building in her chest. The radio crackled on the wall, unclear chatter. She froze, straining to listen. Something about increased movement east. She heard static, then another clipped voice. Elevated posture until further notice. Her stomach tightened. Elevated posture. She knew what that meant even if they hadn't sounded the sirens yet. The brass were nervous, and if they were nervous, it was for good reason. She exhaled slowly. Not today, she muttered to herself. Not here. But war wasn't interested in what anyone wanted. The first indication came not with gunfire but with silence. A kind of heavy, unnatural quiet that fell over the base as though the generators had been muffled, the air itself holding its breath. Then came the alarm, shrill, jarring, echoing off concrete and corrugated steel. Soldiers shouted, sprinting to positions. Boots pounded across gravel. Her hands moved automatically, shutting down the transfer lines. Protocol drilled into muscle memory. Secure the volatile. Keep it safe. She barked orders to the small crew under her, ushering them toward reinforced walls. The depot could become a bomb if stray fire reached the tanks. Her mind raced, but her face stayed calm. That calm, it wasn't bravery. It was necessity. She couldn't afford panic. Not here. Not when gallons of aviation fuel sat beneath her care. Then the shot. A single, sharp crack that split the air, followed by the hollow, terrifying sound of a body hitting the ground. From the corner of the depot window, she saw the officer collapse. A second later, the commotion, medics rushing, soldiers dragging cover, voices breaking into panic. Sniper! The word wasn't spoken, but everyone knew. You could feel it in the way men hesitated to move, in the way the open spaces of the base suddenly seemed like traps. Her pulse pounded. She'd heard stories about enemy sharpshooters, trained professionals who could reach out across miles with uncanny precision. But a story was different from the sound of the bullet, the sudden absence of a man who had been alive 1 second and gone the next. She pressed herself against the wall, eyes darting back to the window. Somewhere out there in the glowing hills, a set of eyes stared back through glass. Cold, patient, watching. And in that moment she knew, nowhere was safe. Not her depot, not the command tents, not the medics who bent over the fallen. The enemy had chosen their ground with care, and until someone found him, the base belonged to a ghost in the hills. She clenched her jaw, forcing the fear down, shoving it into the place inside her she'd always hidden it. But another thought pressed forward, louder, impossible to ignore. She knew how to shoot. She knew distance, she knew wind, she knew patience. And yet she was just a fuel tech. Her hands trembled as she tightened her grip on the clipboard, the absurdity of it nearly laughable. Paper and gauges in a world where precision now meant life or death. She looked again at the hills, at the shadows stretching across the ridges. Somewhere out there, someone had her in his sights already, and all that stood between her and the crosshairs was the thin mercy of chance. But chance wasn't going to be enough, not today. And what she hadn't told anyone, not her crew, not her commander, not even the friends who sometimes teased her about her late nights at the range, was that her secret skill, the thing she carried quietly like a hidden inheritance, was about to matter more than fuel, more than schedules, more than anything else she'd ever done in uniform. But for now she stayed still, watching, listening, waiting for the base to realize what she already knew. The sniper wasn't just another threat. He was the storm. And storms didn't pass until someone faced them. What do you do when death can see you, but you can't see it back? The second shot came minutes after the first. A crack, then the sickening thud of another body hitting the ground. From inside the depot, she pressed herself against the concrete wall, pulse hammering in her ears. A soldier she'd seen laughing at breakfast now lay motionless near the motor pool. His comrades tried to drag him to cover, but another bullet snapped so close they abandoned the attempt. The sniper wasn't just skilled, he was patient, he was deliberate, and with every shot he was unraveling the fragile confidence of the base. Through the reinforced depot window, she watched the chaos spreading like fire. Officers shouting into radios. Medics crouched low, waiting for the signal to move. Soldiers frozen in doorways, unwilling to risk the open ground. The sirens still wailed, but the sound felt thin against the reality pressing down on them. The enemy held the high ground. Her crew looked at her, eyes wide, waiting for orders. They weren't fighters. They were technicians, trained to move hoses and monitor gauges, not crawl under fire. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Stay low, don't leave this building unless I say so, you understand?" They nodded, their fear raw and visible. She turned back to the window. Somewhere out there, 900 yards, a man lay prone, hidden in the folds of the earth, his rifle a needle stitching death across the base. And no one could find him. The designated marksman team had tried. She heard their chatter on the command frequency, clipped and urgent. They thought they had him pinned, but when one lifted his scope above the barrier, a bullet shattered the edge of the wall inches from his face. He ducked, shaken. Their second attempt ended the same way. The hills were his terrain, his camouflage perfect. He could move unseen. And she could feel the balance tilting, the invisible scales that decided life and death. Every minute he remained alive, the base bled morale. Every soldier hesitated just a little longer before crossing a courtyard. Every medic questioned if running to a wounded man was bravery or suicide. By the time the third shot rang out, she couldn't watch anymore. It was an NCO this time, a man she'd seen during fuel inspections, the kind who always double-checked her numbers with a half-smile, as though he appreciated thoroughness. He'd made it halfway across the open ground toward a communication shelter. The round struck him in the side. He dropped instantly, legs jerking, hand twitching toward a rifle he'd never get the chance to fire. Her throat tightened. She wanted to look away. She wanted to keep being what she was, just a fuel tech. But the thought burned in her chest, hotter than the fear. She could make that shot. If she had the rifle, if she had the chance. The irony almost made her laugh. She, who wasn't supposed to fight, might be the only one who could reach him. And yet her weapon sat locked in the depot armory. An M4 carbine, useless against a ghost nearly a kilometer away. The command channel crackled again. Sniper still active, casualties mounting, negative visual, all units hold position. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, trying to block out the voices, the panic, the rising tide of helplessness. Her father's voice came back to her, steady and low. "Breathe, don't fight the rifle, let it speak." She opened her eyes. Her father had never served. He'd been a mechanic in their small town, a man who believed in steady hands and quiet pride. But he had known how to shoot, and he'd passed that knowledge to her as if it were a legacy. And now, standing in the depot with death watching from the hills, she realized this was what he had prepared her for. Not trophies on a shelf, not friendly dares at county fairs, but this. Her crew was silent, crouched low. One of them whispered, "Ma'am, are we gonna make it?" She didn't answer right away. She couldn't. The words felt too heavy in her throat. She turned instead to the reinforced window, eyes narrowing on the jagged. The sniper was out there, patient, precise. And something in her, something she had kept buried under routines, under checklists, under the safe monotony of fuel lines, snapped. She couldn't wait. She couldn't keep pretending someone else would solve this. But doubt slammed back just as quickly. Who was she to try? She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't issued the gear, hadn't run through the endless drills that the designated marksman had. If she tried and failed, she'd expose herself, and the sniper wouldn't miss. Her stomach churned. She thought of her father again. She thought of the officer lying cold in the dirt, of the NCO who'd trusted her reports, of the way the base seemed to be shrinking under the sniper's gaze. And then she thought of the word that had haunted her since enlistment, just. Just a fuel tech. What if that word was a lie? The base shook as a distant explosion rattled the windows. Enemy ground forces were pressing the perimeter now, using the sniper's fire as cover. She heard staccato bursts of automatic weapons, the low thump of mortars. The battle was no longer waiting at the horizon. It was here. Her radio buzzed with another order. All support staff hold positions. Repeat, hold positions. Non-combatants remain secured. She stared at the radio as though it had betrayed her. Non-combatants. That's what they thought she was. That's what the sniper counted on. Her hands moved before her mind caught up. She opened the depot's weapon locker, pulled out the M4, and slung it across her chest. The weapon was useless for what she intended, but carrying it felt like crossing a threshold. She grabbed her helmet, tightened the strap until it pinched her jaw. Her crew looked up at her startled. "Where are you going?" one asked. She hesitated. What could she say? That she intended to do what trained sharpshooters had failed to do. That she intended to leave safety and walk into death's field of vision. Instead, she only said, "Stay here, no matter what happens." And then she was moving, forcing herself out the depot's reinforced door, into the chaos of the open base. The air hit her like a wall, heat, dust, and the acrid stench of cordite. Soldiers sprinted between barriers, shouting, ducking. Somewhere beyond the walls, machine guns rattled. And above it all, she could feel those invisible eyes in the hills, scanning, waiting. She kept low, moving cover to cover. Concrete barriers, a maintenance shed, a burned-out vehicle. Each sprint made her chest seize, each pause felt like an eternity. She told herself not to think of the bullet that could come at any second. She thought only of the rifle. 50 meters away, in a defensive position near the north perimeter, there was a designated marksman's weapon. She'd seen it before, heavy and precise, with the range she needed. The man who manned it had gone silent minutes ago. Whether he was alive or dead, she didn't know. But the weapon might still be there. That was her chance. She stopped behind a barrier, panting, sweat streaking down her neck. She dared a glance at the hills. Shadows shifted in the heat haze. Somewhere out there, the sniper breathed slowly, waiting for his next victim. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "You won't see me coming." And for the first time since the shooting began, she felt calm. Not because the danger had lessened, but because the decision had been made. She wasn't going back. Not until she tried. What kind of person sprints into a sniper's, knowing one misstep means the end? She did. Her boots pounded against the gravel, lungs burning as she pushed herself from one slab of concrete to the next. 20 meters, 30. The distance felt infinite. Each second stretched out until her heartbeat was louder than the alarms, louder than the gunfire echoing across the base. She dove behind a barrier, chest heaving, pressing herself flat against the cold cement. No round. Not yet. The sniper hadn't seen her. Or if he had, maybe he was waiting, patient enough to make her doubt every decision that brought her here. She peeked around the edge, careful, slow. The hills beyond the wire stared back unmoving, beautiful, silent, deadly. The depot already felt a world away. She left her crew huddled in the corner, their faces pale, their trust in her unspoken. If she failed, they'd never know why. If she succeeded, they'd never know how close they'd come to burning alive. Her next target was a maintenance shed, rust bleeding through its corrugated steel. Another 40 meters. No real cover in between. She flexed her hands, tasting copper on her tongue. Wait for the moment. Time it with his shot. And then the crack. Another defender went down by the motor pool, the echo bouncing across the compound. She ran. Every instinct screamed at her to drop, to hug the dirt, to pray he hadn't swung his rifle her way. But momentum carried her forward, legs pumping until she slammed against the shed, breath ragged, fingers gripping rust. Alive, still alive. Her eyes darted toward her final destination, the elevated marksman's platform just ahead, 50 meters, too far, too exposed. She could almost see the rifle waiting there, bipod stretched, barrel angled toward the hills. The soldier assigned to it was nowhere in sight. The sniper fired again. The sound came from the east hills, distant and cruel. Another man collapsed behind cover, struck before he'd even had the chance to aim back. Her window. She pushed off the shed and sprinted, legs a blur, helmet bouncing. The world narrowed to the platform, closer, closer, closer. She lunged up the short ladder, boots clanging on metal, every sound a flare to the invisible hunter. And then she was there. The rifle lay where she'd hoped, a designated marksman's weapon, heavy, sleek, and lethal. Her fingers wrapped around the grip, familiar in a way that startled her. She dropped prone, settling against the stock, cheek to the comb, eyes to the scope. And her stomach dropped. The glass was cracked. A spiderweb of fractures distorted the view, scattering the world into useless shards. A piece of shrapnel must hit it earlier. She twisted the adjustment knobs, but they ground uselessly, jammed. Her breath caught, no scope, no precision, no chance at 800 yards. The absurdity hit her like a punch. She had risked everything, sprinted into the jaws of death, only to find a broken lens between her and salvation. Her hands trembled on the rifle. For a moment she wanted to scream, to hurl the useless glass into the dirt. Around her the battle raged. Machine gun bursts, mortar thuds, the shriek of radio static. Every second wasted meant another soldier in the dirt. Her gaze flicked to the side, to the equipment locker bolted into the platform's wall. She scrambled toward it, fingers clawing at the latch. Inside, a scattering of gear. Spare magazines, range cards, weather notes, a spotting scope. Her pulse steadied. The spotting scope, high-powered, clean glass built for eyes, not rifles. It wasn't designed to mount. It wasn't meant for recoil, but it was all she had. Her mind snapped into technician mode, the same way it did when a pump jammed or a valve leaked. Improvisation, adaptation, solve the problem no matter the tools. She tore through the maintenance kit, pulling ties, clamps, brackets. Her hands worked with furious precision, lashing the scope into place above the cracked mount. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't perfect. But when she pressed her eye to the glass, the hills came into sharp relief. Relief surged through her chest, only to fade just as fast. Improvised mounts slipped. Recoil could tear it free. Every shot would be a gamble, a delicate machine held together by nothing but desperation and steel will. Her lips pressed thin, that would have to be enough. She adjusted her position, stretching out flat, elbows planted, breathing steady. The depot behind her was out of sight now. Ahead the hills rolled away in waves of rock and brush, shadows stretching long in the morning sun. Somewhere out there the sniper waited, camouflaged, patient, watching for the smallest mistake. She scanned slowly, eyes searching for something, anything that didn't belong. Her father's lessons hummed in the back of her mind. Don't rush. The earth has patterns. Watch for the break in rhythm. At first nothing. Only rocks, dust, scrub, brush shifting in the breeze. Her lungs burned from holding her breath. She exhaled, adjusted, again, scan left, hold, scan right, nothing. And then a flicker. A patch of brush too dark, too uniform, not much, barely visible, but enough. She locked the scope, heart pounding. Minutes passed, no movement, doubt crept in. Maybe it was nothing, maybe she was seeing ghosts. Then, as if fate wanted her to know, the sniper shifted, just a fraction, a shoulder easing, a barrel angling. She saw him. Not clearly, not like a target on the range, But the shape was there, a human outline against nature's backdrop, hidden but not invisible. Her chest tightened. This was it, her chance. But reality pressed hard against hope. 800 yards, scope, jury-rigged mount, no spotter, wind whispering at her cheek, and only one chance. She adjusted her grip, settled her cheek, closed one eye. The improvised glass trembled. Her finger found the trigger. And then she stopped. Not fear, not hesitation, reflection. What if she missed? What if she exposed herself, gave away her position, and left the base more vulnerable than before? Would her attempt be bravery or recklessness? Her father's voice echoed again. Don't fight the rifle, let it speak. She drew in a slow breath. And for the first time in her life, she realized the truth. Shooting wasn't about power. It wasn't about proving herself. It was about duty, responsibility. She wasn't here because she wanted to be a hero. She was here because no one else could take the shot. Her heart slowed. The noise of the battle dulled. The world narrowed to her story, the story of a girl who grew up counting gallons, who no one believed could matter in a fight, had come to this. And when the next shot came from the hills, dropping another soldier at the edge of the comms tent, she whispered under her breath, steady and calm. Your turn. How long can 1 second feel? That's what she asked herself as her cheek pressed into the rifle's worn stock, her eye fixed through the jury-rigged scope, her body flat against the platform floor. The sniper was out there, 800 yards, maybe a hair more. She had him now. A shape hidden in the brush, a ghost made real. And yet she hesitated, finger hovering, her mind running faster than her pulse. A single second could decide everything. Life, death, the fate of the base. She forced her breathing steady, falling back on the rhythm she'd learned as a girl. In, out, half hold, let the body settle, don't fight, don't rush. The battlefield churned around her. Radio chatter bled through the static, voices frantic. We're pinned at Sector 4. Requesting fire support. Sniper still active, repeat, sniper still active. Each word clawed at her composure, urging her to fire now, to end it, to gamble on instinct. But instinct wasn't enough. Not here, not at this distance. Her father's lessons whispered back. Shooting was patience, discipline, a puzzle solved not with courage but with precision. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, replaying the math in her head. Distance estimated at 800 yards. That meant bullet drop. At this range, even a perfect rifle round would arc, gravity tugging it lower with every yard traveled. Compensation required. Elevation dialed. But her improvised scope wasn't zeroed, its adjustments crude, guesses rather than certainties. Wind light but shifting, a fickle breeze whispering across her cheek. Even a gentle crosswind at this range could push a round off target by inches. Inches mattered. Inches killed. She adjusted, holding just slightly to the left, trusting her gut, the hours of practice no one else had seen. Elevation, her position sat slightly above the base, but below the where the sniper waited. She factored it in, a subtle angle that would shift the trajectory. And then the human factors. Her own heartbeat, her own breath, the tremor in her hands that she forced still by will alone. She opened her eyes again. The world sharpened into a tunnel, everything outside the crosshairs dissolving. She could just make out his rifle angled forward, the faint outline of his torso against the brush. He was lining up again. Another shot, another life. Her jaw tightened, not this time. She whispered the words without sound, lips barely moving. Steady hands, sharp eyes, just breathe. Her finger began its slow pull, the kind she'd practiced 1,000 times in hayfields and gravel pits, where no one had been watching. She'd always thought those hours were wasted, a hobby, nothing more. But here, in this crucible of noise and fear, she realized they'd been training for this exact second. The trigger broke. The rifle barked, recoil slamming into her shoulder. She rode it steady, staying locked into position, eyes fixed through the glass. At 800 yards, the round's flight would last just over a second, but that second stretched into eternity. She followed the invisible arc in her mind, praying her calculations held, praying the mount didn't slip, praying the wind stayed true. And then impact. The sniper jerked violently, camouflage breaking apart as his body recoiled against the ground. His rifle tumbled from his grip, sliding into the dirt. For a moment, the brush seemed to hold its breath, the silence louder than the shot itself. She exhaled, but she didn't move. Training, instinct, whatever it was, kept her eye on the target. A sniper could fake death, could shift, roll, draw a sidearm. She waited, patient, scope steady on the unmoving figure. 10 seconds, 20. No movement. Only then did the truth sink in. She had done it. The ghost in the hills was gone. For a moment she didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel relief. She felt nothing. A void, hollow and strange, as though her body hadn't caught up to what her mind already knew. The shot she doubted, the one chance she thought impossible, had landed. The radio crackled, voices breaking through in fragments. Sniper neutralized, repeat, sniper neutralized. A rush of sound followed, cheers, urgent commands shifting tone from panic to momentum. Across the base, movement returned. Medics sprinted. Officers emerged from cover. Soldiers raised their heads, hope flickering in their eyes. The invisible grip that had held them down had loosened in an instant. She lay flat, cheek still pressed to the rifle, letting the reality seep in. Her heart hammered in her chest, not from fear but from the sheer weight of it. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to take this shot. She was supposed to be at the depot, counting fuel, anonymous, unnoticed. And yet here she was, the one who had tipped the scales. But even as the base surged with renewed energy, she stayed cautious. One sniper could mean another. Trained units rarely sent a single ghost to hunt alone. Her scope swept the hills, scanning for any shift, any hint of a second predator waiting to punish her for the kill. Her throat was dry. Her body trembled now, the adrenaline ebbing, the enormity pressing in. Had she really done it, or had she just bought them a few minutes? She shifted slightly, radioing into command. Sniper at grid 231 neutralized. Confirmed target down. Position compromised. The reply came almost instantly, tight but relieved. Copy that. Outstanding work. Hold position. Reinforcements en route. Outstanding work. The words felt foreign, almost absurd. She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't meant to be congratulated for pulling a trigger. And yet, she'd saved lives. Maybe dozens, maybe more. Her mind tugged back to the depot, to the faces of her crew huddled behind concrete, to their whispered question, "Are we gonna make it?" She wanted to tell them yes now. She wanted to run back to assure them it was over, but she knew better. It wasn't over. The sniper had been a scalpel carving fear into their defenses, but the larger assault still raged. Enemy forces pressed the perimeter, mortar rounds shook the earth, and somewhere out there, commanders would be furious that their ghost had been cut down. Retaliation was coming. She adjusted her scope, hands steady again despite the tremor in her chest. The depot felt a lifetime away. The girl who'd carried clipboards and wrenches felt like someone else. Here, prone on the marksman's platform, she was something new, something she hadn't expected, hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. A soldier. The battlefield didn't care about designations, didn't care if you were a technician or an officer, infantry or support. In the storm, you were either the one who acted or the one who waited. And she had acted. The calm settled over her again, strange and heavy, as she whispered into the scope, to no one but herself. One shot, that's all it takes. How do you breathe again when the world has just stopped? She lay still, cheek pressed to the rifle, eyes locked on where the sniper had fallen. The brush swayed gently in the breeze, indifferent to the fact that a predator no longer hid there. Around her, the base exhaled, like a collective breath that had been held too long. Soldiers rose from behind barriers. Medics sprinted openly to the fallen. Shouts turned from panic to coordination. And yet inside her there was no relief, only a strange, raw tremor. Her hands shook against the stock, not from recoil, but from the enormity of what she had done. She had killed a man. The thought landed heavier than the recoil ever had. One moment he had been alive, steady, hunting. The next she had ended him with a pull of her finger. She didn't know his name, his age, his story. He might have had a family. He might have been someone's son, someone's father. But she hadn't hesitated because hesitation meant more of her own would die. The truth was a paradox. She had saved lives by taking one. And as the base roared back to motion, she realized no one would truly understand what it cost her in that moment. She whispered under her breath, so quiet it was almost a confession. I didn't want to, I had to. Her radio hissed. Sniper confirmed down, but enemy forces still advancing. Sector East perimeter is hot, requesting all available support. The battle wasn't done, far from it. She forced herself upright, rolling her shoulders, trying to shake the weight off. The rifle felt different now in her hands, heavier, as though the shot had bound her to it forever. She scanned the hills again, but no other glint, no movement revealed a second shooter. If there was one, they were waiting. Below in the dust-choked courtyards, enemy mortars slammed into the earth, shaking her bones with every impact. Shrapnel shrieked across metal. The air stank of fuel and cordite. The assault had begun in earnest, waves of fighters pressing the perimeter. Machine guns rattled. Grenades popped like distant thunder. Her kill had shifted momentum, but it hadn't ended the fight. She tightened her grip on the rifle. The depot flashed in her mind again, the crew waiting, terrified, unaware of what she'd done. She wanted to go back, to tell them it was safer now, to reassure them with her presence. But she couldn't. She wasn't the same person who'd left them. And the battlefield wasn't done with her yet. Marksman North Platform, the radio snapped. She froze. They were talking to her. Not by name, they didn't know her name, but by position, by role. She wasn't invisible anymore. Cover fire requested on East Sector, Grid 274. We're taking heavy fire. Her throat tightened. Marksman, that wasn't her title, that wasn't her job, but now it was who she was. She settled back into prone, pressed her eye to the scope, and swung east. The spotting scope held, though loose, glass shimmering with tension. Through the haze of smoke and dust, she saw them, enemy fighters moving low along a dry gully, rifles raised, advancing toward the wire. At this range they were specks, but movement betrayed them. She adjusted elevation, steadied her breathing, and fired. The shot rang, echoing across the base. One of the advancing figures collapsed, arms jerking wide. The rest scattered, diving for cover. The attack slowed, if only for a heartbeat. Another adjustment, another shot, another target down. Her hands didn't shake now. The tremor had been replaced by something colder, focus, relentless and sharp. She wasn't counting kills. She wasn't chasing glory. She was holding the line the only way she could. But with every trigger pull, the moral weight pressed deeper. Each life ended was a question unanswered. Who were they? Did they believe in their cause as much as she believed in protecting her own? She forced the thoughts back, burying them where they couldn't distract her. Reflection would come later. Survival demanded silence now. Her ears rang with overlapping sounds. The pounding of mortars, the stutter of machine guns, the screams of the wounded. Voices on the radio blurred together. Need cover. Enemy breaching the wire. We're running low on ammo. She pulled the trigger again, each round a rhythm, each shot an answer to chaos. But ammunition wasn't endless. Her magazine clattered empty, the hollow click startling her more than the explosions around her. She fumbled for a reload and found the pouch half empty. The rifle hadn't been prepped for a prolonged defense. Her jaw clenched, improvised scope, improvised mission, and now improvised ammo. The next wave surged closer. She could see faces now, twisted in determination, rifles raised as they charged the wire. The perimeter erupted in close-quarters fire, defenders throwing everything they had to hold the breach. Her scope was useless at this distance. She pulled her eye back, gripped the rifle differently, and prepared for something she hadn't expected. The fight was coming to her. The platform rattled as a mortar shell struck nearby, shrapnel hissing through the air. One piece sliced the railing inches from her hand, showering her with sparks. She ducked low, heart racing. For a moment the thought stabbed her. Maybe she'd pushed too far. Maybe she'd lived her moment of impossible precision, and this was where it ended. But the voices below pulled her back. Soldiers shouting, wounded crying out. The base wasn't numbers and maps anymore. It was people, her people, and she wasn't done yet. She slung the rifle, grabbed the carbine at her chest, and moved down from the platform. Boots hit the dirt hard. Dust filled her lungs. She pressed against the wall, the ground alive with gunfire. Closer now, too close. A shadow broke across the barrier. An enemy fighter vaulted the wire, rifle ready. Instinct took over. She raised the carbine and fired, the burst snapping him backward. Her breath hitched. The distance now wasn't measured in yards but in steps. She had crossed into another kind of war, one that wasn't about precision or patience. Her hands trembled again, not from fear, but from the dizzying shift. From hidden sniper to close-quarters survivor in minutes. And she realized something then as she reloaded, as the perimeter shook with violence. She could never go back. Not to the depot. Not to being unseen, overlooked. Just a fuel tech. The line had been crossed, burned, erased by the sound of her shot on the base still needed her. The fight still raged. And as much as she longed for safety, for anonymity, she couldn't deny the truth anymore. She was in it now, fully, irrevocably. And the storm hadn't passed. It was only just beginning. How do you hold a line when the line itself is breaking? She pressed her back against the barrier, dust choking her throat, the carbine hot against her palms. The roar of the fight was everywhere now, no longer distant thunder, but a storm that had swallowed her whole. Enemy fighters pushed through the wire, shadows lunging forward in bursts of smoke and gunfire. This wasn't precision, this wasn't patience, this was survival. The first one came fast, vaulting the barrier just meters from her. His eyes were wide, his rifle already rising. She fired before she could think, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. He crumpled, momentum carrying him against the dirt. She didn't watch him fall, she pivoted, scanning for the next shadow, the next threat. Her ears rang with overlapping sounds. The thump of grenades, the chatter of machine guns, the shouts of men calling positions, the screams of the wounded. It was a world of fragments, every second demanding a decision. Move left, fire, duck, reload, repeat. A soldier slid down beside her, face streaked with blood. She recognized him, one of the perimeter guards, barely older than she was. His helmet sat crooked, eyes wide with shock. "Your fuel crew," he shouted over the noise. She nodded once, curt, not looking away from the breach. He blinked at her, confusion fighting with relief. "Not today, huh? Not today." She leaned out, fired again. Another enemy staggered backward, clutching his side. Her stomach twisted, the sight no less human at 20 meters than at 800. She wanted to shut her eyes, to pretend they weren't faces, weren't people. But the battle didn't let her. Every hesitation carved another hole in the line. Her magazine clattered empty. She reloaded, hands moving on instinct, the motion faster than her thoughts. How many rounds had she fired now? 10, 20. Each one a life, each one a scar she would carry long after the noise stopped. But the noise wasn't stopping. Mortars shook the earth, peppering the barriers with shrapnel. One blast threw her against the wall, ears ringing, vision flashing white. She blinked hard, tasting dirt, forcing herself upright. The soldier beside her was down, clutching his leg, blood pooling fast. Medics couldn't reach them, the courtyard was a killing field. She grabbed his collar, dragged him behind the barrier with a strength she didn't know she had. He groaned, teeth clenched against pain. "Don't stop," he hissed. "We can't let them through." She pressed his rifle into his lap. "Then we won't." And she was back up, leaning over the barrier, sighting down at the breach. Her rifle barked again, shoulders aching from the repetition. The ground was littered with bodies now, theirs and ours, tangled in the same dust, no different except for the direction they'd run. Her chest heaved, sweat stung her eyes. Her hands shook with fatigue, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. She thought of her crew at the depot, waiting, trusting. She thought of the men who'd already fallen, their laughter from mornings past still echoing in her head. She thought of her father's voice, steady, quiet. Dignity doesn't shout, it shows up. And she showed up. But inside, a question gnawed at her with every trigger pull. How many could she take before she broke? She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't hardened like the infantry, men and women who had been forged for moments like these. She was a fuel technician who'd carried clipboards and wrenches. And yet, here she was, doing the work no one expected her to. The line wavered. Enemy fighters surged again, a wave of bodies against barbed wire, shouts in a language she didn't know, faces contorted with desperation. For a split second, she saw herself in them, fighting not for orders, not for ideology, but simply for survival. Her chest ached, her finger hesitated. And then a round snapped past her head, grazing the barrier, showering her with stone fragments. Reflex shoved empathy aside. She fired. The figure dropped. The world narrowed again into black and white, action and reaction, life and death. Her radio crackled with a voice strained but urgent. "Hold the line. Reinforcements inbound. 5 minutes." 5 minutes. It felt like forever. She gritted her teeth, pulled the trigger again, until her magazine ran dry. She reached for another and found her pouch nearly empty. Panic pricked at her chest. She'd burned through the last of her rounds before help arrived. Then a hand. A rifle thrust into her grip. She looked up. Another soldier, face smeared with soot, shouted, "Keep firing, we'll cover you." He disappeared into the haze before she could thank him. She slammed the fresh mag home, the action instinctive now, her body moving even as her mind begged for rest. Every muscle ached, every nerve screamed, but she didn't stop. The breach finally slowed, the enemy pinned by overlapping fire. Mortars shifted further out, thumping against the hills as reinforcements closed in. The chaos dulled, not gone, but changing timbre from frantic survival to desperate endurance. She collapsed against the barrier, chest heaving, rifle across her lap. For the first time since leaving the depot, she allowed herself to blink, to truly feel the exhaustion dragging her down. Her hands were raw, blistered where the rifle rubbed. Her throat was sandpaper, lips cracked. Her uniform clung with sweat and dirt. And yet she was alive. The soldier she dragged to safety groaned beside her, blood still seeping through his makeshift bandage. She pressed a hand to his shoulder, steadying him. His eyes fluttered open, meeting hers. "You're not just fuel crew," he whispered hoarsely. She wanted to answer, to say something, to deny it, to accept it, but the words caught in her throat. She only nodded once, quiet, her eyes shifting back toward the smoke beyond the wire. Because deep down she knew the truth. She could never be what she was before, not after this. Not after the shot, not after the breach, not after the blood that now stained her hands. The battle wasn't done, the war wasn't done, and neither was she. When the storm finally breaks, how do you live with what it left behind? The first thing she noticed wasn't the sound of gunfire dying away. It was the absence of it. The staccato bursts, the mortars, the endless chatter of rifles gone. In its place came a hollow quiet, broken only by the distant hum of engines and the groans of the wounded. Reinforcements had arrived. Their armored vehicles pushed through the smoke, heavy guns pounding the last of the attackers back into the hills. The breach at the wire was sealed, the enemy scattering, retreating into the scrub where the base's machine guns cut them down. She sagged against the barrier, body trembling, the rifle heavy in her hands. For a moment, she didn't trust the silence. Her ears rang with phantom echoes, her body braced for a shot that no longer came. The soldier beside her gripped her arm, weak but alive, his eyes locked on hers. "We made it." She wanted to believe him. She forced herself to her feet, knees buckling, every muscle screaming. Around her, the courtyard looked like another world, smoke hanging low, concrete with shrapnel, bodies scattered across dirt and wire. Some wore her uniform, some didn't, but death looked the same in all of them. Medics swarmed, pulling the wounded onto stretchers. Officers barked orders, their voices steadier now, urgent but no longer frantic. Soldiers stumbled back into formation, weapons slung, faces streaked with ash and exhaustion. And her. She stood in the middle of it all, covered in sweat, grime, and blood that wasn't hers. Carbine limp at her side. Sniper rifle still slung across her back. No one had given her orders. No one had told her to step into this fight. But every eye that passed over her seemed to pause, recognition flickering in their gaze. One officer strode up, helmet tilted back, his face set hard but his eyes softened with something like respect. "North platform, right? That was you." She hesitated. Her mouth opened, closed. She wasn't sure she wanted to claim it. But the look in his eyes told her he already knew. "You saved a lot of lives," he said, voice low, steady. Then he was gone, shouting new commands, already pulled back into the machinery of war. Saved lives. The words echoed in her head, clashing with the images burned into her eyes. The sniper falling in the hills. The fighter she shot at the barrier, his expression still etched into her memory. The rows of bodies now cooling in the dust. She had saved lives by taking others. Her legs carried her forward without thought, past medics kneeling in blood-soaked sand, past soldiers too exhausted to speak, their heads bowed as they reloaded for whatever came next. She moved like a ghost through the wreckage, eyes searching for something she couldn't name. At the depot, her crew spilled out as she approached, their faces lit with relief, disbelief. One of them reached for her, gripping her arm like they had to make sure she was real. "You came back," he breathed. She nodded, unable to speak. Another whispered, eyes wide, "Was it true, the sniper, that was you?" She froze. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to send the truth back into the silence where it belonged. But their eyes begged her for something to hold on to, something that would make sense of the chaos they'd survived. So she only said, "We're still here, that's what matters." It wasn't an answer, but it was enough. Inside, though, she felt the fracture widening. They saw her as something, now someone. A soldier who had stepped beyond her role, who had done what no one else could. But she knew the cost. Every shot she fired had carved a mark inside her, invisible but permanent. She sat alone in the depot after nightfall, helmet on the table, hands raw from recoil and grit. Outside, generators hummed, filling the silence with a low drone. The base smelled of disinfectant now, covering blood with something sharper. Her reflection stared back from a darkened window, eyes hollow, skin streaked with dust, a rifle leaning against the wall like a shadow that wouldn't leave her. She had wanted to disappear into her job, into routine. She had wanted to be invisible, but war had pulled her into its light, and now there was no way back. She thought of the sniper again, the stillness after her shot. Did he know it was coming? Did he see her in those last seconds the way she had seen him? She would never know. And that not knowing would follow her longer than the cheers, longer than the recognition. A knock on the door pulled her back. A young private stepped in, awkward, helmet tucked under his arm. He shifted on his feet before finally blurting, "Ma'am, the men wanted me to tell you. You gave us hope today." She didn't know what to say. Hope, it felt like a fragile word, too small for the weight in her chest. She forced a nod, quiet, and he left her alone again. The silence deepened. She leaned back, eyes closing, letting the exhaustion wash over her. The war wasn't done. The enemy wasn't finished. Tomorrow would bring more attacks, more battles, more impossible choices. But tonight the base still stood, the depot still held, and her crew still breathed. She whispered to herself, not as a boast, not as comfort, but as a vow. I'll carry it, whatever it takes. And in the quiet that followed, she understood something she hadn't before. Survival wasn't victory. It was responsibility. The cost of living through the storm was carrying the weight of all those who hadn't. And she would carry it. What do you hear when the gunfire fades? For her, it was the hum of the generators, the crackle of radios, the low voices of soldiers too tired to raise them any louder. The war was still out there, waiting beyond the hills, but inside the base, silence had returned like a stranger, unfamiliar, awkward, almost frightening. She sat on the platform again, the same one where she had taken the shot. The rifle rested across her knees, its weight unchanged, though it felt heavier now with memory. The cracked glass of the scope glinted faintly in the fading light, a reminder of how fragile everything had been, how close it had come to breaking completely. Her eyes drifted to the hills. Somewhere out there lay the man she had killed. She hadn't seen his face clearly, only his outline, a shadow against the brush. But she carried him now, not as an enemy, not as a trophy, but as a ghost who would walk beside her for the rest of her life. She whispered into the wind, words no one else would hear. I'm sorry. Not because she regretted what she'd done, but because she understood the truth her father had once tried to explain, that every shot carries weight. Not just the bullet, not just the recoil, but the weight of another human being, one who will never breathe again because of you. The base was alive again now. Repairs, perimeter reinforced, medics working through the night. She could hear laughter in the distance, not joyful but desperate, the kind that comes when men and women are grateful to still be alive. They would tell the story differently, she knew. They would talk about the sniper at 800 yards. They would talk about how one shot turned the tide, how a fuel tech became a marksman in a single breath. Stories always grew taller in the telling. But she knew the truth. The truth was in her trembling hands when she first pulled the trigger. The truth was in the hollow silence that followed. The truth was in the way she still felt the earth shift beneath her, as though gravity itself had changed. She hadn't wanted to be a soldier. She hadn't wanted to be seen. She had wanted nothing more than to do her job, to fuel the machines that others would drive into glory or ruin. But war doesn't ask what you want. It only asks what you will give when it comes for you. And she had given everything she had, her steadiness, her silence, her hidden skill that no one had thought mattered. She remembered her father's words again, spoken on quiet mornings before the world grew complicated. Dignity doesn't shout, it shows up. That was all she had done, shown up. The officers might pin a medal to her chest. They might write her name in reports, file it in archives where no one would ever read. The men and women she had fought beside might nod to her now with respect, where before they had passed her by unseen. But none of it mattered as much as the weight she carried, the faces, the silence, the knowledge that sometimes survival demanded you step beyond who you thought you were. She thought of her crew again, huddled in the depot during the worst of it. They had looked at her differently when she returned, not as the quiet technician who refueled trucks and jets, but as something else, someone who had stood between them and death. She didn't know if she wanted that, but she knew she couldn't give it back. She would always be the woman who took the shot. And yet in her heart, she still felt like the girl who had once lain in a field with her father's old rifle, learning patience, learning silence, learning that the earth has its own rhythms. That girl hadn't wanted glory. She hadn't wanted war. She had only wanted to feel steady in a world that often was. Maybe in the end, that's all she had truly done. The stars began to emerge above the desert sky, sharp and endless. She watched them with tired eyes, her hands finally still against the rifle. She thought about tomorrow, about the next battle, about how many more times she would have to carry the same weight. She thought about the stories that would be told of her, stories that would never match the truth. And she thought about the sniper one last time, the ghost who had forced her into the light, the enemy who had shaped her fate even as she ended his. She whispered again, softer now, almost like a prayer, "I'll carry it." Because that was the only answer there ever was. Not triumph, not regret, not glory, just carrying. And as the night deepened, the moral of it all settled over her, not sharp, not loud, but quiet, the way dignity always is. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.